Back in 1994, Paul Martin was Canada's finance minister, bringing in his first budget. Unlike today's finance minister, Joe Oliver, who inherited an improving fiscal situation, Martin and his team took over a mess. Canada's deficits were through the roof, our credit rating was plunging, and confidence was low. Here to shed some light on crafting a first budget, and maybe what he thought of the federal and provincial budgets that came down this spring, we welcome former finance minister and, of course, the 21st Prime Minister of Canada, Paul Martin, along with two of his chief budget advisors from the 1990s. Terrie O'Leary was Mr. Martin's chief of staff in the 1990s, and Scott Clark was the Deputy Minister of Finance in the late 1990s, and we welcome everybody to this table.
Thank you.
This should be fun. Yes, you want to make a correction already.
Cut. I think you don't want it. I think you do maybe want to talk about the first, but it's really the second budget that you want to talk about.
Well, we're going to get there.
Okay.
That's okay.
Okay. Well, I don't. Anyway, I just wanted to.
I know the second one is the big one, but
Yeah.
you did have a rookie budget once.
Okay, that's fair game. Okay.
Okay.
I just want to make sure you didn't make a mistake. Heaven forbid.
Oh, heaven forfend. No. I know the 95 budget is the big one for you.
Okay.
But we're here to talk about the 94 budget first.
That's a Terrie O'Leary
Keep
move,
all
what
this
you
in.
just did. That is terrible.
Keep all this in. Okay. I do want to take you back to 1994, Mr. Martin, your first budget as finance minister, rookie finance minister. What's the first thing a rookie finance minister has to decide when crafting a budget?
We had about 60 days to produce that budget. I had not been the finance critic, so that while I had a reasonable grasp of the economy, I certainly didn't have a reasonable grasp of defense making, and so the first thing I had to do was to get to know the department. I knew that I had, just probably the finance of the public servants in the department. And that was absolutely true. But they didn't know me, and how we were going to work together really was the key. And how we were going to work together, that is to say, the minister's staff, the minister, and the public service. And
Why does that matter?
Because if you can't work together, you're not going to get anywhere. And I can tell you that one of the first things that happened that I think that actually probably enabled us to work very, very well together is that nobody knows who is around the table in terms of who's equal and who's not equal. And what was very important from my point of view was to establish that everybody was equal. And that meant that the deputy minister was no more equal than the youngest of the public service was in there, and that in fact that the minister was no more equal than in fact, for instance, the chief of staff, which was, I think, pretty evident to everybody to begin with. And so what happened was very early on at a meeting where we had just a bang-up fight over numbers and over what it was all about, but everybody was sort of within their grounds. At one point, Terrie O'Leary tore into me, and everybody around the table was stunned. My God, she's really torn into the minister.
Meaning yelled at you?
That would be a bit of an understatement. And so what happened was, everybody was stunned by this. But what it did was make it very clear that anybody at the table could take into the next person. The problem that occurred is that what she came at me, right, and I fought her back, it turns out that she was out about numbers. And it turned out at the end of the thing that she was right and I was wrong. So the next day I came in and I made a full presentation and I gave her an abacus in front of the whole place. And I think that what really did, I think that set the standard for what could happen at the table.
Did you give him the heads up that you were going to tear into him in front of everybody?
No.
You just did it?
No, we had gone through a very extensive process in building the Liberal Red Book for the 1993 election campaign. So we had gotten to know each other very well in terms of policy discussions, but I also knew how much he liked having very honest and challenging policy discussions. So to be honest with you, I wasn't as aware as obviously I should have been about the dialogue that was taking place between him and I, although that I think that he's quite right that it actually very quickly leveled the playing field for everybody around the table and made for some very important discussions that we had.
So it had a positive influence at the end of the day because everybody did feel they could contribute.
Yes, very much so. But
Is it career limiting to scream at the finance minister in front of everybody, though?
well, I certainly wasn't aware of it at the time, and I certainly thought it could be afterwards, but no, it was not. No.
Scott Clark, you're from the bureaucracy in this part of the three-legged stool, if I can put it that way. So what is your responsibility when they're having these meetings?
Generally speaking, or do you want to go back to the 94 budget, or just generally speaking?
Generally speaking.
Like the minister said it quite correctly, in meetings that we had, everyone was involved in the policy discussions. Those meetings were, everyone was around the table, everyone got to say their piece. Now, on my side of the table, so you have to refer to their side of the table and my side of the table, because I would sit directly across from the minister, then he would have his staff and I would have my staff. But it was pretty much a free-for-all. But I think what was important from our point of view as bureaucrats, because everyone in the department at that time in 94 and 95 had worked for the previous Conservative government. And then we had a new Liberal government, and we didn't know exactly what was going to happen, how it was going to change, what would it be like. But I think what emerged very quickly is that what really matters around a table like that is respect for each other, respect for your ideas, that they respect the bureaucracy. They ask us to come forward with ideas. They want us to come forward with ideas, and I can go to my department and the people who work for me and say, you know, I want to hear from you. We want to get work started. Let's get going, because they want us to participate in the policy discussion.
Were you in the room when she went nuclear on him?
Well, there was so many times.
That's not fair.
It's, you know, I think it would be pretty fair to characterize our meetings as volatile, stimulating, exciting, tiresome at times. They went on for hours and hours and hours, let me assure you.
But I presume they were volatile because you set a kind of a tone that said, yeah, I'm the minister and you're the advisors, but bring it on. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that was, in those circumstances, that was absolutely crucial. You think about it. You described the difficulty that the country was in when we took over. And we were going to bring down this first budget, and we knew that it wasn't hopefully going to be the last budget that we were going to bring down. And it was really important that we got to know each other, but that we also dealt with the issues in depth, that you couldn't take anything for granted. And the only way that was going to happen is if everybody laid their cards on the table, and they did it as strongly as they possibly wanted.
Okay, give us some sense of how this works in terms of your relationship with the Prime Minister. Does the Prime Minister come to you and say, here's what I need you to achieve? Or does the Finance Minister go to the Prime Minister and say, here's what I want to do, please sign off on it? Or what?
No, the Finance Minister has to take the lead, because the Finance Minister is the one who has to bring down the budget. We had campaigned on bringing the deficit down from 5.8 or worse to 3. It became
5.8%
Of GDP.
of
GDP.
Yeah.
Because the number was, I mean, it was 40+ billion or something
Oh, yeah,
at the time,
it was. That's right.
Which was high for back then.
Yeah, but the real problem that we faced was that not only was it 40 billion, but it was very clear that if there was anything went awry in the international financial system, our interest rates are going to go through the roof. If our interest rates went through the roof, it wasn't going to be 40, it was going to be 60 or 70, and we were Greece. That was the fundamental issue that we really had to deal with at that table, which is why the debates were certainly no holds barred, because they couldn't afford to have people being necessarily polite and proper.
Now, one of the things that you and Joe Oliver, the current finance minister, may have had in common is that you at the time were relatively new to politics, and the Prime Minister had been in for decades. And Joe Oliver is relatively new to certainly his portfolio, but also to politics, and Stephen Harper's been around for decades. How does that dynamic play itself out?
It didn't play in our case at all. The finance minister essentially had to achieve that 3% target, and it didn't take very long after the first budget when it would be very clear that we had to go all the way and eliminate the deficit. And the only way it was going to happen is if the finance minister played his role.
So far we've been talking about the relationship sort of between you two with him. But I presume, I mean, you're the civil service and you're the political advisor. I assume you two had to lock horns a lot of the times as well, because what might be kosher for the bureaucracy might be, politically a tin ear. Yes? So did you two go at it a lot?
We didn't, actually. It was quite extraordinary what happened at Finance, I think, because of the magnitude of the task that we were all facing. because everyone was so really taken with wanting to do a really good job. We knew that we couldn't do this. We couldn't make a mistake. There had been too many failed attempts to balance the budget. The issues and the timing was so serious that we had to get it right. So I think there was a real sense of mutual respect on both levels that deepened as we get to know each other. I think the minister's right that the very relaxed discussions that he has with his own staff at the political level, the fact that he's a great listener and a consensus builder, brings people in from the outside all the time, I think really opened up those doors between us and the department. I think the department reached out to me right from the start and said, we want to work together. If this is going to be a success, we have to make it a success at the financial level, at the fiscal level, with economists. We need you to make it a success internally with your caucus, with your cabinet. We're only going to do that if we work together.
What do you call him in these meetings?
Polite.
I called him minister.
And you called him minister. You never called him Paul?
Well, I could have slipped up every once in a while, but
I think you did.
Okay. Let's try this. Every budget, of course, is both a financial and a political statement. Your first budget was still years away from an election. Joe Oliver's first budget is 6 months before an election. How does that change the calculus of what you want to do?
Well, it didn't change our calculus at all. I mean, we came in with a very clear plan. We were going to essentially, first that plan was to basically get to the 3%, but very quickly, certainly after the first budget, when we realized the credibility problem that Canada had, it was we were going to eliminate the deficit. But we were not seeking to eliminate the deficit as the ultimate end. Elimination of the deficit was a means to a greater end, and that greater end was growth. And the reason for that is that if you do not have economic growth, then you're going to have a succession of deficits, and we wanted basically to get this monkey off of our back. The second thing is that more important than the deficit, although the deficit was the symbol, was the debt to GDP ratio. And we had one of the worst, if not the worst. We had the worst, except for Italy, and Italy had largely borrowed from their own population, a debt to GDP ratio of any of the major countries, of the G7 countries. And so the pressures on us not to make a mistake were huge. And that's really, but also the pressures on us to deliver. And it became very clear after the first budget that the next budget was the one in which it had to happen.
And that's the one where you allegedly broke, I guess as they say, you broke the back of the deficit in that 95 budget.
Yes.
But as you go into...
But it was part of a longer-term vision. It was, how do you build growth in the economy? That's what and we were very clear, and we went out to see Canadians. When we told the consultation process with Canadians was crucial. And what that consultation process was to say to them, and I'm on record as saying this, we're not here to simply make an arid balance sheet look better. We're not going to protect our social programs unless we deal with this issue. Our health care, our education, whatever it may be. Those are not going to be protected unless we succeed. And it was growth was the ultimate goal.
I do want to pick up on this issue, though, of how a budget is different 6 months before an election than it might be 3 years before an election. Now, Joe Oliver's just brought down a budget that may or may not have a significant impact at the polls in October. Can you tell from your experience whether that is the case, whether people will remember in the fall what was in the budget in the spring, and therefore it's important in an election year, or it's not because they've forgotten already? What's your view on that?
I think it depends on the nature of it. I mean, you're dealing with a very short time frame. It really takes a really major move to have that kind of effect months and months later. But I also think it's got to be about a plan. I think people believe governments when they outline what the plan is and what the ultimate objective is. If the ultimate objective is just to deliver something to make someone happy and it's not part of an overall plan, then I think that you lose your credibility if it's just a little budget initiative here and there. We had actually a little bit the opposite, because going into the 97 election, we were carrying a lot of baggage from some of the EI cuts. So, and also some of the measures that we had on in Western Canada on the Crow rate. So we were actually carrying into election campaign budget measures that actually hurt us substantially in some of those areas.
Does
So-
the bureaucracy's advice change the closer to an election date you get?
I don't think so. I don't think it shouldn't. I mean, I think the bureaucracy's responsibility is to give the best advice you can give. Now, having said that, if you're a deputy minister at any given moment, you'd be foolish to say I'm not sensitive to the politics of the situation. But going back to that period that Terrie was just talking about, I remember the reaction to the 94 budget, which wasn't very good, but I also remember the reaction in the media and the public to the 95 budget, which was very, very good, because the Canadians generally wanted us, or wanted the government to fix the problem. And that continued on with the 96 budget and the 97 budget, because we were always doing better. Every year, the deficit came in below what we were forecasting, and I think that credibility that was gained in those years, I think that played very well going into the 97 election, and then bingo, the deficit was gone.
But generally speaking, the closer you get to an election, are you listening more to your political advisor as opposed to your financial advisor?
No, I actually think that your questions, in our context, are misplaced. It may be that under different circumstances, those questions would apply. But we had set out a plan. We had told Canadians what our plan was, and what the single most important thing for Canadians was that we deliver on that plan. So we set these rolling 2-year targets, said that the deficit was going to come down this way, and that we were not going to go back into the soup. If we had deviated from that because we're 6 months away from an election, we would have lost all credibility. And we were not, and that credibility that we had built up as a result of this budget was absolutely crucial. It was crucial in terms of the markets, but it was also crucial in terms of Canadians, because we told Canadians that if we do this, then we're going to be able to invest in the kinds of things that you want us to invest in, and that's what we did.
I think you have to remember too, by 97, the economy was turning around. I mean, the economic growth was very strong. Global economic growth was very strong. Interest rates had come down. Consumer was very happy, credibility was very high. So overall, the economy was doing very well. I mean, it's hard not to do badly when everything was working in the right direction. The deficit was gone, the economy was growing, unemployment was falling. And as the minister said, in the 98 budget, that was the first step to start reinvesting in the economy. So everything was kind of coming together rather well for the government.
I wonder whether this budget team still watches Budget Day. You watched the finance minister give his budget speech this year?
I watched part of it.
Just part of it?
Yeah, I didn't watch the whole budget speech, but I certainly watched the results. I watched the results, and I was obviously very interested, but I didn't watch the whole budget speech.
Why not? Because I could imagine you watching it saying, I wouldn't have said it that way, or I wouldn't have done that, or yeah, that's not bad.
Well,
you do that?
I certainly would have said I wouldn't have done that.
Now, let's be fair here. Was there one thing that he announced that you said, yeah, okay, that's all right?
Yeah, let me think about it.
No, come on now. Give me one thing that you thought was okay in that budget. Oh,
It's been a long program. We'll come back to that.
you can't think of one thing?
Well, he stood up.
Oh, my. This was not supposed to be a partisan discussion.
But it really isn't. I tell you, I mean, fundamentally, I really disagree with what he did. I mean, we sought to eliminate the deficit. And it was crucial because of the circumstances in which the country found itself that we did it. Otherwise, everything else that this country had done was going to be in jeopardy. And so there's no doubt about it. But we did it as a means to an end. And I can tell you, to make the elimination of the deficit the great national objective, when in fact the way to eliminate deficits is through economic growth once you've got the balance sheet in some kind of order. To not talk about education, to not talk about research and development, to not talk about the ways in which you build a strong economy, I just think doesn't make any sense. And so, yeah, I have a fundamental disagreement.
Okay, but could you say, well, $1 billion special fund for public transit to be given out to municipalities across the country? I can live with that.
I could have lived it a lot easier if it had been done 2 years earlier, and that's when it should have been done. That's what the cities are saying, and the cities are right.
How about you? Did you watch the budget speech?
I do. It's left a lasting impact with me. I watch every budget speech every year, yeah.
And you watch it differently, obviously, from the average citizen. What do you look for when you're watching a budget speech?
Well, obviously, I look for the content and all the rest of it. I'm interested in business. I'm interested in where we're going. I'm interested in what each government decides to do with that opportunity. I mean, budgets are just a moment in time. It is not the mandate of the government, but it can set a direction. And I find it fascinating. I've always said that that the time that I spent working in finance with Mr. Martin was one of the best jobs I ever had, and it really was. And I'm a budget person, yeah.
You're a budget nerd. You still a budget nerd?
Well, I'd have to admit, I've been in every budget lockup for the last 4 or 5 years.
Including this one?
Absolutely.
So when Joe Oliver got up and read the budget, what's the stuff that stays with you?
I think what stayed with me, I would describe the budget as a fantasy.
Wait a second, you're supposed to be nonpartisan. You're the former bureaucrat here.
Well, former is the key word. Now I'm just an average commentator on public policy with my own views about what public policy should be.
What's the fantasy?
Well, like the fantasy is this government has set as its only goal the elimination of the deficit for, I think, every year since 2010.
And they did it.
And they did it. After how many years they finally achieved it. And then we think they achieved it, but we know that there was a little bit of hokey pokey going on there with the numbers to make it happen. But they had no choice but to make it happen because that was their only political goal. Without saying that, then I think that goes to your point about the election. How could they go into the election without being able to say, we eliminated the deficit? But I think the deficit has basically been eliminated with a few rabbits out of the hat. And as far as
well, let's just understand with it. Like the rabbits out of the hat are the selling of the GM shares and
contingency reserve
rating
being
contingency
cut,
fee.
yeah, and changing your methodology about how you forecast oil prices. So if you choose enough optimistic assumptions, I can generate revenues 5 years from now, and I can invest them in infrastructure, and everybody can be very happy. But that $1 billion fund for transit is after the 2019 election. It's not even after the 2015 election.
Well, this is where I go to the political advisor, say, wouldn't you like to be able to go to the polls in the fall being able to boast politically that the budget is balanced? And people probably won't notice these little niceties.
Except for, you have to take it in terms of the context of the time. Like, balancing the budget was never going to be the be-all and end-all of what we're going to be doing. When Mr. Martin was Prime Minister, that was showing the fruits of our labor in terms of the Kelowna Accord, in terms of the agenda for cities, in terms of a national childcare program. It's never supposed to be a means in itself. And I certainly think, myself personally, after the 2008-2009 financial crisis, I think the world has fundamentally changed. I think that we need to have a big conversation in this country and in other places about what are we going to do with a world of 1% or 2% growth. That did not bring us the prosperity that we came to enjoy in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. And I think that we're in a whole new world here. And I don't think it's about just simply balancing the budget anymore. I think it's about reinventing our economies and securing a whole level of growth that we right now don't see a way of achieving in a world of what the IMF would say would be mediocrity, which I don't think is enough for industrialized countries.
Well, let me try this. Is it never appropriate to sell assets to balance the books?
Well, you sell assets to balance the books, you really haven't balanced the books, so you've lost the assets. So it depends then what you use, depends what you use with the money for. I mean, if the fact is if you sell the assets and you reinvest them in other long-term assets, then I think it does. That's what Ontario did, and I think that makes sense.
So you're okay with the selling of 60% of Hydro One, essentially to balance the books?
I would not be, but the idea of selling GM shares, which is an asset, and all of a sudden using that, the way in which it was used, I don't think that's right. But you're going to then say, well, you're being partisan. The fact of the matter is, talking about the facts is not being partisan.
Okay, but again, did you ever sell assets to balance a budget?
No.
Never did.
Well, did we ever sell assets? We nationalized, we privatized the CNR, but we made it very clear the reason we were privatizing the CNR, that was a policy decision, because we believed, and it turned out to be the correct policy decision, that privatizing the CNR was the way to have a better railroad. And it turns out, if you take a look at the results, that was right.
Because some people, of course, are going to say, well, wait a second, he's against the selling of the GM shares to balance the budget, but he's not too tough on Kathleen Wynne selling 60% of Hydro One in order to help balance the budget.
She's reinvesting the money. She's reinvesting the money in long-term assets.
That's controversial, right?
Well, it may well be controversial. It happens to be a fact.
Okay, but Hydro One pays a dividend to the people of Ontario every year. why wouldn't you just hang on to the whole thing and use that money that you get as a dividend and reinvest that money?
Well, because so does Better Transit, pays a dividend to the people every year.
Scott?
Well, the other point of selling the GM assets is, in effect, you could look at the announcements that the Prime Minister made last October with respect to the family tax cut plan and the changes to, or enhancements to the universal child care benefit. They got paid for, okay, by selling GM shares and cutting down the contingency reserve. That's how they got paid for. Because remember, he said they wouldn't do those until the budget was balanced. He made the announcement, everything went south after that, and he had to find a way to balance the budget and pay for those announcements, hence cutting the contingency reserve back and selling the GM shares.
Which of the, I mean, there's lots of tax breaks in this budget, 6 months before an election, lots
Yep,
of tax
yep,
breaks.
yep.
Are you okay with any of the tax breaks offered in this budget? Joe Oliver's budget?
As a matter of public policy?
Yeah.
No, I'm not. Well, I can't think of any. I'm like the minister. I really have to think hard
Well,
about
he cut
this one.
taxes.
He cut taxes broad-based. He cut taxes for everyone. This strategy is a tax reduction strategy for a very select group of people. All right. If the income splitting for high-income families, 15% of families, are going to get that. A small change to the universal child care benefit. Fortunately, they didn't do the adult fitness one. I think now they're going to have a special panel, to investigate whether or not adults should have a fitness tax credit. Today, the Auditor General came out and said all those special tax breaks for everybody, whether you're a fireman or you take the bus, no one knows how much they cost. They should be evaluated. The Department of Finance doesn't do it. So what you have is a tax reduction strategy which has increased the complexity of the tax system. It's unfair, and not one iota contributes to economic growth.
But let's talk politics. Terrie O'Leary, let's talk politics. Would you acknowledge 6 months before an election, it is kind of a cute idea, if you can do it, to offer tax breaks to the Canadian people?
Sure, but I think that outside of the context of a broader plan, I think that you run counter to thinking that you are doing it for that sake alone. And I came from a different background myself personally, and maybe the department has kind of rubbed off on me and I've lost some of that. But I do believe that when you have an overall plan and when you're able to deliver it in a framework that people understand, it can't be just to buy off one group or another. It has to be because you are actually looking at the long-term potential of where you want to take education, for instance. One of the most important things that we did after we balanced the budget was we had an education budget, and we developed and we did a government top-up on the Registered Education Savings Plan so that every single person that had a child that was going to go to school, and for the enhanced productivity of your economy, you've got to get some kind of post-secondary education, whether it's skills training or education. And we said the government is now going to work hand in hand with those families and with grandparents and aunts and uncles, and we're going to do a top-up for anything that you could put aside for your kids' education. And I think that people understand that that's about government trying to appeal to what every struggling family is trying to do, which is to pay for your kids' education.
Well, let me put
when you
that-
have little trinkets, sometimes you get they get lost.
Let me put that to Mr. Martin, because you cut taxes when you brought down your budgets. Jim Flaherty and now Joe Oliver have cut taxes when they're bringing down their budgets. What's the difference?
Well, first of all, we didn't cut taxes until we had eliminated the deficit. So we didn't put the deficit at risk by the cutting of taxes. What's happened here is that the income splitting has put the deficit at risk. They've said, here's this great national objective, but we cut the contingency reserve, and if the projections turn out to be the least bit wrong for the second time, they will have cut taxes and plunged the country back into deficit. And when you think about what they did the first time they cut taxes and plunged the country into deficit, they eliminated a $100 billion surplus over 5 years. Now you think about how much lower our debt would be if they hadn't done that. And you think of all
I know
of
what they'd say, though. They'd say, had we not cut those taxes and given the stimulus to the economy that it got, that would have been harmful to the economy as well. That's their position.
At the time they did that, the economy wasn't in any trouble. At the time this was done before the recession. They took us back into deficit before the 2008 recession hit. The problem is, in a way, in this discussion, is you're putting us in a position where we have no alternative but to answer to your questions. But the more you ask the questions, the worse this budget looks.
Yeah, Yeah, going back to your point, though, I think to the credit of Mr. Harper, I mean, you're quite correct. He's controlled the narrative for this election so far. I mean, he's made cutting income taxes for Canadian families or some definition of middle income families. That's going to be number one, probably the number one issue going into this election. He set that out there. That was in October. He started actually in 2011, right? I happen to think economic growth and job creation is more important, but he's now set the narrative, and it's up to the other opposition parties to decide, okay, how do we respond to that? And how do where do we find the resources to respond to that? So he set the narrative.
Let me do some focusing on the Ontario budget just for a little bit here. And to this extent, it's conventional wisdom in politics that when you got tough stuff to do, you do it in the first couple of years of your mandate because you don't want to do it too close to an election. So this is I think this was the third Charles Sousa budget. Where are we right now? So first majority government budget that the Ontario government brought down. Some people I've talked to, Liberals, are wondering why this budget wasn't harsher, why it wasn't tougher. For example, the price of gas is it's at historic lows right now. People got the equivalent of a $500 to $1,000 tax cut because the price of gas is so low. Why not move into that space? Raise the gas tax. Maybe cut down on people's driving. It's good for the environment. It would help the bottom line. We didn't see any of that. Was this a missed opportunity for the Wynne government?
I don't think so. I'll be honest with you. I'm not
I asked that question knowing I'm sitting at the table with three Liberals, but anyway, keep going.
But it goes to when I think back to your question earlier about cutting taxes, like for instance, when we were back in the 1990s, after we had balanced the budget, of course people came to us and said, one of the smartest things that you could do is to cut the GST. It never occurred to us, ever, that after all the struggles that we had gone through of a previous Conservative government, Mr. Mulroney, implementing the GST, after our own internal struggles personally at the start of our mandate of making sure that we did an analysis and understood that the business community had adopted the GST, that we were going to stay with it, it would never have occurred to us for political expediency to cut that GST. To be honest with you, I always, and I've felt this way for a while, I think the business community and a lot of people should never, ever have allowed that cut to take place because you've now handicapped governments forever. Raising taxes.
Andrew Coyne says no. Andrew Coyne did a column, you saw it, the National Post the other day, saying, it doesn't hamstring governments forever, just let them raise taxes.
So you let me know what government you last saw that got elected by raising taxes.
Kathleen Wynne's, Dalton McGuinty's, over and over and over.
On raising taxes. They campaigned on raising taxes. I don't think so. They were part of a broader plan that they might have had.
They campaigned against raising taxes and then went and did it.
Sorry, and there was the Ontario, there was a healthcare levy for sure that we saw up close and personal. But I'm just saying it is the most difficult thing in the world to do, and that's why it goes back to having a plan. And I honestly do believe as well, and I go back to the subject we were talking before, and Mr. Martin talked about it at lunch today. These are not periods of stable, high-growth economic times right now. We're in a little bit of a precarious position in North America, and quite frankly in Europe, even though we're starting to see some growth rebound. But we've got a fundamental problem that we're all going to have to come to grips with. We've got consumers that are in debt, that have got competing demands on what little money that they have right now. There's not a lot of space in this room for governments to be raising individual taxes. There is a space for a big debate to start happening on where we want to set the priorities for 5 or 10 years from now. But I think we're actually in this world of 1.5%, 2%, 2.5% growth. I think we're all struggling with how to deal with this in terms of a new economic mandate for both the province and the feds.
In which case, let's finish up on this. If you could get, Mr. Martin, the team back together again around the table, what's the one issue that you would say to them, if we were putting a budget together today, here's what we need to tackle?
Economic growth. Absolutely, without any shadow of a doubt. This country needs economic growth because for precisely the reasons that Terrie gave. We are in a very volatile economy, but it's a volatile economy operating within a very narrow base, one of the lowest growth that we've really seen in the post-war years. And our ability to compete with the Chinese, with the Indians who are coming on strong, with the United States, is going to be totally dependent upon the kinds of jobs that we can create, the quality of those jobs, which talks about education. It is going to be dependent upon where, in fact, government has stimulated the economy, which is infrastructure on the one hand, and it's discovery research on the other, which that's the basis of the new economy. And so if you're going to do it, that's where you've got to have the focus. Look, we did bring in the largest tax cuts in Canadian history. We're not against cutting taxes. There's a time to cut taxes, however. And then when you do cut taxes, you've got to look at the beneficiaries of those taxes. I understand. I mean, cutting taxes through allowing income splitting. Well, single mothers don't get that, and there are a lot of single mothers out there. Cutting taxes through income splitting. What does that do to the two-income family where both people are earning roughly the same? I mean, you've got to take a look at the people who are going to benefit from your activities. I just think they've made the wrong choice.
I thank the three of you for coming into TVO tonight and pulling the curtain back a bit and showing us how budget making and setting priorities all works. Paul Martin, former Finance Minister, 21st Prime Minister of Canada; Scott Clark, former Deputy Minister of Finance; and Terrie O'Leary, former Chief of Staff. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.